We've been on this today's ABA journey for the last couple of years, rolling out universal protocols, SBT, across our organization in the province of New Brunswick, and we've come through that process to really value rapport, right? And there's this huge focus on HRE and rapport through all of our programming and in our sessions, and that being a priority, it just made sense to go to that next step of kind of revamping our intake process so that this would be the foundation of everything right from the very beginning. So that from the first time we meet a family, our goal is really to build that very positive therapeutic relationship with the caregivers and the client before we ever kind of start going in hot with developmental or curriculum assessments. So that's where that started.
How long has it taken, ish? I get that it's a little bit different, but are you talking about spend a few sessions, few days, few weeks? What's it like?
Really good question. It's much like the SBT approach, it's values-based and it's kind of performance-based.
Trial-based sort of stuff?
Yeah, so it's a 4-step intake process. Okay. The first step is always a caregiver interview, and there's a few components of that. So we do an initial questionnaire, which we're calling the HRE and Essential Skills Questionnaire, and the aim is to learn from the caregivers, just learn what we can about their child so that we can develop that SR context or that ready to learn context so we can have that ready before we even meet the child. We have a couple other components of that caregiver interview. So we also ask about values and kind of explore any cultural variables that might impact our programming or our goals going forward, so we can make sure everything stays socially valid. We also explore barriers, so barriers and resources that the families may be encountering that can contribute to their ability to participate in the session or to, maybe follow through on recommendations that we make, that kind of thing. And just to bring a bit of an awareness of what's the reality of their situation or their life, right? We also, depending on kind of the type of the path, the intervention path that caregivers are looking for, we might also explore their kind of the routine, their family routine from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. So there are a lot of components to that, and so just depending on how parents are doing, we're following their lead, right? So it's kind of that performance-based approach, but with caregivers. So we're attending to how they're reacting, how is rapport building with them. We don't want to kind of come in hot with the caregivers too and drill them with 100 questions first time we meet them. So the caregiver interview could be completed during one session, or it might be over many, many sessions.
Okay.
Yeah.
How are staff enjoying it, or are there any other other effects that you're seeing with it?
I haven't had any negative reports. I mean, change is always a process, right? So there's always a bit of a learning curve for people, but we used a change management approach to the rollout of UP and SBT, and so by the time people got to implementing this intake process, it was like just taking all of the components, the pieces that they've been exposed to and putting it together, and it just made a lot of sense. So it's a 4-part intake. We have the caregiver interview, and once we do that, the second step is to do a play assessment. So the play assessment is something that we've kind of adapted it for our context, but it's a synthesis of an assessment that we've learned working with Dr. Eric Larson from Lovass Center Midwest many years ago, and also the assessment from the Balance program developed by Dr. Kelsey Ruppel. But we've made modifications, like I said, for our context. So that allows us to identify really early learning goals like joint attention, responding to name, is this child doing any spontaneous imitation, even just looking at the interaction that they have with their caregiver. It's a caregiver administered assessment. After that, the third step is that the clinician or the supervisor who's assigned to that case just attempts to run a universal protocol with the child themselves. So they jump in there, they they've created the environment, potentially, hopefully, a positive learning environment based on the caregiver interview, and they just do child-led play, and their goal is to achieve HRE with that learner. So if they achieve HRE, they can kind of go on to the next step. If they're not able to achieve HRE, then our intake process stops there, and that becomes the goal. So it's kind of like a don't go any further. Our goal is to make sure that this learner is HRE, and we work on that relationship. We've developed some measures so that we can measure kind of indices of happiness and rapport with the learner, so that it can be a measurable goal. If we are able to achieve that rapport fairly easily, or perhaps we've worked on it as a goal and now it's been mastered, we go on to probe the essential skills of communication, toleration, and cooperation. If there's no problem behavior, then we don't do an ISCA necessarily. We just do a probe to find out which of those skills the child's missing. And if they do need those skills, then again, the intake process stops there, and those are their goals that go into their IEPs. So if they are able to accomplish something like up to a CAB 4 or 5, then and only then, and also rapport. So if rapport is good and the child demonstrates that they have those skills, then and only then do we do a curriculum or a developmental assessment. So we don't go in hot with that stuff right away. Sometimes we can get to that developmental assessment early if everything goes swimmingly, but it may, for other children, take us 6 months to get to that. Our clinicians have reported that what they don't have to do now is rationalize to parents why they're doing this or why they're doing that. So they're getting, parents seem to be buying in and feeling comfortable from the beginning. And
it's a more enjoyable process for them almost?
Yeah, I think it's more enjoyable for our staff and also for families. So, I mean, I think if we look at it from a caregiver perspective, by the time they get to us, they've already had quite a journey, potentially, of multiple service providers, maybe advocacy and long waits to get in to have a diagnosis. And we don't know also what they're dealing with their child in their daily life. So I think they're tired, and we're just, we're these people kind of coming in, sometimes coming in too hot, maybe asking a lot of questions, drilling them with the whole developmental history of their child and that kind of thing. So I kind of see it as equivalent to going in just with, a universal protocol or SR when you first meet a client. So I'm Amanda Sonia, I'm a BCBA, and I'm Clinical Director of Education in New Brunswick, Canada.